How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then feel free to subscribe. In the last video, we talked about the changes to Unbound Chaos, and in the comments section, I was told about this post from the community manager talking about the change specifically. And so today I thought I'd read the post and talk about the general ideas in the post. That way we get some general thought process behind the change. I would also like to point out that this is a community manager making this post. This is not a developer. So this is just the messenger. So don't shoot the messenger. If you have issues with the change, think about proactive ways to fix the problem and not just saying that it's a bad change. All right, so I'm going to read you guys the post and then we'll talk about the post after. Hello, in the latest build of the Shadowlands beta, we are reworking Unbound Chaos. The previous entry in this talent location, Fell Mastery, was a straightforward damage increase to Fell Rush, but you needed to use every charge of Fell Rush within your damage rotation to take full advantage of the talent. Since that playstyle already exists with Momentum, we want to provide a talent that injects Fell Rush into your damage rotation less frequently, but still makes you use Fell Rush. The inner demon crashing into your enemies shortly after Fell Rush completed was an attempt to present that damage in a more visually impactful way, but ultimately it does not feel very responsive. As a result, we are changing the design to enhance the damage of Fell Rush directly. And while from a just general interactive point of view, this change was a decent option. And if you want to hear my opinions based specifically off of this change and what it was replacing, I would suggest watching my last video, link in the description below. As for this response, however, there's a few specific things that I want to talk about in this response, which kind of almost scare me that this is what their thought process actually is. The main thing that I want to talk about is the fact that they're talking about momentum specifically, making it so you have to use all of the fell rushes that you get. Obviously, that's how momentum works. But modeling this talent based off of not being like momentum, but still being almost like a lesser version of momentum, forcing you to use Fell Rush as a DPS button, but not using it consistently enough like momentum. So now we're introducing talents that are lesser versions of other talents that actually have no synergy. And when we think of Demon Hunter as a class, since the very beginning, we've been a class that revolves around talents, and making it so there's talents that are specifically not supposed to be in line with another talent goes directly against on how the class is made to be successful. And I'm also not saying that the way that talents interact with Demon Hunter is the way the class should be. I personally think talents should just make a class better, but not dictate how the class plays. Like with most classes, talents are just a change in amplifying the damage they already do with baseline abilities, not really adding anything extra to change the class completely. Whereas when we think about Demon Hunter, demonic, momentum, all of these things are talents that really make the class into what they are at endgame. And when we think about that talent row, we have to start thinking about what that talent row is supposed to be doing. When Fell Mastery was in that talent row, we knew exactly what that talent meant. When we saw Fell Mastery in this place, if we were playing a momentum-based build, we're most likely going to be taking that. However, when we see Trial of Ruin in this place, if we're playing a First Blood build, we're going to be taking that. Now, obviously, there was some situations where Fell Bombardment, which used to be here, but is now here in a completely dead talent, used to be taken over Trial of Ruin in First Blood builds, but realistically, Unbound Chaos would have to be completely overtuned for it to actually beat out Trial of Ruin. Even if it did slightly more damage, most people probably wouldn't take it over Trial of Ruin, given Trial of Ruin doesn't force you to press any extra buttons. And I think that's really the biggest issue with Unbound Chaos, is the way it is now, it doesn't actually fit into any talent builds. The only way it's ever going to be used is if it's completely broken. And in order for it to be completely broken, they would have to buff this talent significantly. When we think about the old Unbound Chaos, it was Immolation Aura, a Vengeful Retreat, Fel Rush. Your Fel Rush damage would do the same damage, and then the demon would slam. With the new Unbound Chaos, it's still the same idea. Immolation Aura, Vengeful Retreat, Fel Rush. But now, instead of having the Fel Rush flat damage, we're just getting a % increase of the Fel Rush, and we're not getting the Demon Slam. So what that means for the actual numbers of this talent is whenever they give you a % increase of an ability, but you're pressing that ability no matter what, in these situations, we would have to press Fel Rush to proc the original Unbound Chaos damage, and obviously we're pressing Fel Rush to proc the increased damage to Fel Rush with the new Unbound Chaos. We can actually subtract 100% of the increased damage from this talent. So this actually, instead of saying 300%, really is only 200%, because you're going to be pressing the Fel Rush anyway in either of the situations. So the actual damage that we're getting from this talent specifically is actually less than what the video said before, and will require even more tuning than what we thought before. I honestly am at a point where if this talent is just going to be a talent that's just there and it doesn't synergize with anything specifically, then why is it even in the game? Then what's the goal behind this talent? If the goal is to make it so we press Fel Rush, but we aren't pressing Fel Rush too much, then we're just creating a purgatory of a talent that doesn't make any sense in any build option. It's not enough Fel Rush uses for it to be good with momentum. It's too much Fel Rush uses for it to be used with demonic, unless it's completely broken. So we don't want to be designing talents that have to be completely broken for them to be good. And I think that's the biggest point that I wanted to point out here, is if we aren't going to get something that's a demonic or a momentum based talent here, then potentially we should probably be looking into options for other talents that we can put in this spot to make it better for other builds. One of those talents is obviously Bloodlet. Bloodlet was in this row to begin with, I believe. Let me just take a look. Yep, Bloodlet was in this row to begin with, although it was a little bit different with First Blood being competing with it. But if Bloodlet was in this place, it would be something that would be used for every build type. It would be a good option, and it would make it so we are using a button that we want to actually be pressing as a DPS button that actually does damage, that doesn't really lose out on any of our ability to survive in Throw Glaive. Or there's another option that people will probably be less inclined to go for. However, I think it would be a very good option. And that talent is an old talent called Chaos Cleave. For those of you that don't know, Chaos Cleave was a talent in Legion that made it so your Chaos Strike did 10% of its damage in AoE to all of the enemies around you. I feel like that would be an incredibly good option to put here, because it would work very well with Cycle of Hatred and Demonic. Right now, when we think about a Cycle of Hatred specific build, this row is actually giving me the most issues, because Unbound Chaos used to be very strong, so we would just use it because it was a lot of damage. However, now with Unbound Chaos being somewhere in this line, it doesn't really make sense to press any of these buttons if you're playing a Cycle of Hatred build potentially. Because if we think about it, we want to be only spending our resources on Chaos Strikes in order to get refunds. So we don't want to ever be pressing Blade Dance unless potentially we're using the Chaos Theory Legendary. That's some theory crafting that we'll have to see how that actually functions. Unbound Chaos, if it's not doing enough damage, it doesn't really make sense to press these extra GCDs when we could just be pushing forward towards more Chaos Strikes. And then Glaive Tempest, with it costing Fury, doesn't really make it an option either. Obviously, it's good for AoE situations, and I think it's probably going to be what I'm going to be taking for the new Cycle of Hatred demonic version of that build. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be a DPS positive to actually press that button. Whereas if we had Chaos Cleave here instead of Unbound Chaos, it would be a no-brainer. We would take that every single time, and it would actually have very good synergy, while also making it so there's not any other issues with the talents that they take. You could still take Chaos Cleave with momentum. You could still take Chaos Cleave with First Blood on the off chance that Trial of Ruin damage and Chaos Cleave damage are relatively similar, and it would make it so your chaos strikes actually felt like you were doing something when you were using First Blood still. I think that option would be significantly better than Unbound Chaos, and it would actually make it so it's synergized well with the class. And I think that's the biggest thing, is we have to think about Demon Hunter as a class on its own. Because Demon Hunter is the only class that really is reliant on talents to be successful. And if we're making talents that are inherently not synergistic with anything else, then we are going against directly what makes the class good. And that's the biggest point I wanted to make in this video. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't like the video, F5, refresh, try it again, maybe like it the second time. Have a good one.